racialized othering allowed for the co-option of the indigenous pagan culture. This co-option turned the once celebrated sexually active women of the Nahua into the temptresses, whores, and pagan putas. The women who provided sexual services were called the joyful ones. The indigenous population did not associate the words virgin or puta to any positive or negative attributes because these words didn't even exist in their language. The creation of these words led to the indigenous woman's psychic internalization of this dichotomy. This is Lauren and Age. Gendered racialized othering of process links to the indigenous deities and the women of the particularly dangerous sexuality associated with the dangerous spirituality. The bad female physician is depicted as having a friction-loving vulva. She deceives the people and seduces them, perverts them, bewitches them. This hypersexualized representation of the bad healer specifically links to the evil doing of the female sexual body, brings up Christian medieval representation of the whore. The ideals did not judge the women according to the virgin whore dichotomy. The nuptial didn't have a word, does not have a word for virgin. The closest word to whore in the nuptial was the joyful one, which refers to the women who provided sexual pleasure in the houses of joy and participated in the ceremonial festivals, but were not associated with the sin as the puta within the Spanish moral system. Sacred energies represent the perspective from which to analyze and transform the prevalent post-colonial dichotomy between the virtuous virgin and the pagan puta. However, this entrenchment of Catholicism and morality in Chicano and Latino cultures of white women has become the embodiment of sexual liberation, while the mestiza is seen as always being repressed, and the colonial mindset of society is to reject the Indian roots of the mestiza in order to whitewash women into believing that their only hope for sexual liberation comes from whiteness. This is Cesareos in 96. Malicia became known as La Chinga, or the Factman, the Mohor, the prostitute, the woman who was sold out to her people, the Spaniards, but our epithets, Chicana spit out with contempt. The worst kind of betrayal lies in making us believe that the Indian woman within us is the betrayer. We Indias mestiza, the police the Indian in us, and the brutalized and contemporary male culture has done a good job of this. The dark-skinned woman has been silenced, gagged, and caged, and castrated in the 20th century for 300 years. She has been colonized by the Spaniard and Anglo and her own people. She was invisible and she was not heard. The light shone through her veil of silence. The spirit of the fire spurs and her to fight for her own skin and the piece of the ground to stand on and the ground for which to view the world. And the whore virgin dichotomy is still occurring in this quote through the emphasis on the Latinas' modesty and the rejection of sexuality. This rejection teaches Latinas that sexual liberation can only come through whitewashing themselves. This is Cesareos in 96. You could always tell as Latinas we had when we undressed immodestly facing the wall, or in my case, dressing in the bathroom stall, thinking of ourselves morally superior to our white classmates. The womanhood was full of mysteries. The religion of our culture and the culture of religion helped to create a blur in the vagueness about what went on down there. I was so ashamed was I about my own down there. How could I acknowledge my sexuality, let alone enjoy sex with so much guilt in the guise of modesty? My culture locked me into the double chastity belt of ignorance and Barenja, which is shame. I remember wanting to be fearless like the white woman around me, to be able to have sex when I wanted, but I was too afraid. And psychological violence against women continues in the status quo through different forms. This is epistemic justification for the shaming of the female sexuality persists in the assumption of neutrality in debate, policy, discourse, and the threat construction. Every position is exchangeable, yet women is seen as conditional or away from the norm set before us. They are punished by the theory debates just like the Chicano because switch sides on the issues of policy or critical theory without questioning the role of these ideas play in our lives. However, this neutrality is just an illusion. Thought is fundamentally grounded in the structure by location from which one thinks this illusion is far from benign. It is fundamental in the constitution of the modern and colonial world, justifying the subordination of the non-Western epistemologies in order to justify oppression, violence, and oppression by the West. And the reading of the 1AC is critical to break down the colonial forms of knowledge. The psychological violence is waged against the mestiza woman in the status quo in everyday life. We are unable to express ourselves. This is Miglio in 11. The authority to divide the planet was not only political but epistemic. The global linear that thinking goes hand in hand with the constitution of modern and colonial world. The observer is above the world and can map the world. The hubris of the 0 point that sets the stage for the imperial control and colonization of the knowledge of being in diverse ways in the producing knowledge. It's eliminated all forms of human knowledge or order. Scientific thoughts or positions itself only in the valid form of producing knowledge. And Europe acquires an epistemological hegemony. The geopolitical and biographic politics of knowledge is hidden in the transparency and the universality of the 0 point. Is imperiality. It consists precisely in the hiding its locality and thus and managing the universality that which everyone has to submit, being aware. One thing has become the fundamental concern of those who have been mapped out by the colonial and imperial differences. It creates a shift in geography and reason I am, where I think is one basic epistemic principle that legitimizes all way of thinking and delegitimizes the universal. And we must heal the virgin whore dichotomy by deconstructing the regulation of spiritual and sexual practices. We are betraying the conventional binaries of properness and deviance of sexual females. This is Laura and 8. The virgin whore dichotomy is largely represented by the Americas La Virgin de Guadalupe as spiritually impure and Loma Lynch's physically defiled concubine. This dichotomy's negative effects develop a female subjectivity there. Status is iconic and good, bad, and others are affirmed as they become the symbolic tools of the perpetuating nationalist Mexican identity. Guadalupe is crowned the patron saint, while Malinche is known as the violated fuck mother, the first mestiza. This insidious dichotomy pits the traditionally religious mestiza woman against the superstitious, demonized native woman. Healing this dichotomy entails deconstructing the ways it simultaneously regulates spiritual and sexual practices, and to break down this ideology of putahood, the culture of denial and Chicanas have been taught must be betrayed. This betrayal must come through the discovering one's sexual power and energy, recreating La Lupe as a sex goddess by speaking from the vulva. This is Serios in 96. I was angry for so many years every time I saw a Virgin de Guadalupe, an ideal so lofty and unrealistic to boys aspire to be. Boys have to aspire to be Jesus. They were fornicating like rabbits. Well, the church pointed to us women who are our destiny, marriage, and the motherhood. The alternative was putahood. Discovering sex was like discovering writing. You have to go beyond the guilt and shame to get to anything good. For a slip of a moment, it could be spiritual in the cosmos, pivoting on a pin. Like every woman who mattered to me, I have had to search for her in the rubble of history. I have found her. She's Guadalupe, the sex goddess who makes me feel good about my sexual power and reminds me that I must speak from my vulva, and thus Diana and I advocate for the reappropriation of Guadalupe and the Malinche through mestiza epistemology. And in order to break down sexual barriers that oppress women of color, we must begin reinterpreting the myths of indigenous beliefs that include the cultural realities of the Chicanas, and we are able to reclaim the sexuality and indigeneity of the Chicana and betray the cultural standards that have demonized their sexuality and power. This is Vargas in 12. Rather than regulate themselves in a historic epistemic paradigm, Chicanas chose to engage in different traditions. They use imagery of the female deities to stand and claim their space by reinterpreting the myths of the old Mexican indigenous beliefs. We reclaim the repressed femininity and indigeneity of the Chicana. The Asantula and other Chicanas assert their need for a cultural mythology that progresses out of the contemporary cultural realities. The Chicana identity is marked by the violence and oppression enacted upon the Chicanas as an embodiment of the Anglo-Chicano, Indian, Mexican, and Spanish culture, and experience what Asantula calls the Chicoso. When they try to bridge the boundaries that force identity, these aspects of the identity continue to contradict each other and remain incompatible until the cultures of dominance recognize the circumstances and conditions that have created in them. And whitewashing Chicana sexuality demands a universal identity which only comes through self-repression, violent assimilation, and eradication of others. This outweighs all other impacts. This is commonly 2K2. By treating alternative types of sexuality as immoral, deviant, and sexual, it calls upon you to purge dispositions in yourself and to support the treatment and punishment of others that manifest them in the grounds you in self-idealization of a relational identity. The demand to purge the entrenched contingencies in yourself because it is unworthy of ethication is the recipe for self-repression. It treats the contingent identity as a natural standard. It grants the ethical idealism and the loathing of the self, and you will want to purge any signs of the tendency, the demand to purge the brain of contingencies as an uncritical imperative and of moral purity and an overly developed enthusiasm for normalization. One must be either grounded in this universal self-identity or reformed until they are both expressed in a certain self-contempt and an inability to accept oneself, unless you can either universalize or eliminate them. Both orientations demand either to defeat the other in oneself or in the other selves, or to love it until it replicates this ideal self. And daughters of the broken one, born of the violated Indian, divine warrior women of the burning fire who gave light to the dark night, give light to the Mundo Zardo. We will come back. We will start the war of the deep soul in this dark night. We will revive the spirit of the Mundo Zardo.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go up to your advocacy. Can you explain this in your own words for me, what your advocacy is?
Okay. Pretty much the reappropriation of Guadalupe and La Malinche is taking the ideal version of Guadalupe, i.e. the virgin, the pure one, and turning her into a sexual goddess for which we get our sexual energy. That comes specifically from Mercesarios and 96 evidence. And the reappropriation of La Malinche is no longer seeing her as a fucked one, but instead as a betrayer of the normalized colonial mindset that is put into the mestiza's mind.
Okay.
And by doing this, we're doing it through a mestiza epistemology, means that we're going about this through
Yeah.
You can explain it better.
Epistemology, which is like reinscribing those myths that have been like internalized by mestizas. So like the Virgin of Guadalupe is like the representation of the virgin part of the virgin whore dichotomy, and La Malinche will be the whore.
Okay.
So they are the embodiment of this dichotomy.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Let's go down to your Connolly evidence, like the very last one you read. So, you say that this like whitewashing causes all of these impacts. Okay, so
And like the whitewashing occurs like through like showing that only like white women are able
Yeah,
to
it's like
have
the liberal, it's like the
sexual
liberal feminist
liberation.
that comes and tells
Yeah.
you, oh, your culture is so patriarchal, you need to abandon it because
Yeah.
that's the only way that you can reach like sexual liberation.
Because currently in their like in the status quo of mestizas, like their alternative types of sexuality are seen as deviant, as seen as
Right.
immoral, as seen as sick
Right.
and wrong.
okay. So then your top part. Let me just make sure that I'm getting this right.
The
Your
first
top
part?
parts, yeah, the Laura and A, like the
Okay.
very first one. Is that saying that like it used to be like the opposite way around before they whitewashed it?
Before the Spanish colonizers
Right.
came over, like the Aztecs did not actually have words for
Okay.
like whore and for virgin.
Right.
Like what they did, like derived virgin is actually talking about like a pubescent woman.
Okay, so this
And
is
a
Harrison
whore-
96 talks about like when Catholicism comes over, that's when we see the shift.
Well, like that's the Spanish colonization.
Okay.
Spanish colonization was in the name of the church, in the name of the king.
Right.
It was a way to demonize the native woman and put
Okay.
her as an antagonism to the white woman.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. I just wanted to make sure that like, I had the order of like the events right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's like 20 seconds left, so let's go ahead and start prep.